Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth lecture for motor control and learning. In today's lecture, we're going to be discussing motor control theories and sort of some of the variables that were developed or were developed in these theories, and what these theories have to consider in terms of different factors of how the body controls movement when they were developed. Before we get started with the lecture component of today, I wanted to just reiterate about what's going on at the campus. This course and the courses that I teach specifically will continue to be running regardless of the strike. I'm in a different union, so my courses will be running as normal. So hopefully you all get that message. And in terms of the labs, remember, Lab 1 will be due before your first in-person lab, Lab 2, which is next week, the 14th and the 15th, depending on whatever time that you had selected when you registered for the course. If you're unable to make the lab, of course, just email the TA, and they will sort of tell you where to go from there. And that's about it. Oh, in regards to the assignment, I mentioned again last week, it'd be a good idea to start thinking about what you want to, what motor skill you want to utilize for the assignment. And once you've chosen what you would want to do, please email the TA, and then they will give you pointers on whether or not that would be a good skill, and also whether or not that skill has been taken already. Ask a question. Yeah, Alexis. Yeah, it's always online with the lectures. Yeah. Okay, great. Any questions? Oh, Malak's being my hype man says I'm looking good. Thank you. Went black today. Everyone okay? Which TA do we email? Your TA. Can anyone tell Matt how to figure out what TA he has? I think they should. I think they would have emailed you as well, right? So Megan's asking about the Gendrastic maneuver. It's just if you exert your force on something while doing a tendon tab reflex, it just makes it stronger. You can mentally inhibit a patellar reflex or a tendon tab reflex, and so if you're focusing on something else, it limits your inhibition of that. Is that good, Megan? Yeah. So Matt, did you see Brooke's comment? Awesome. Okay. So let's get started. So the outline of today's lecture is going to look like this. We're going to be discussing what motor control theories had to include or answer when they were being developed. We're going to look at the two main motor control theories, and then we're going to discuss the interaction of sensory processes in us completing motor skills. This lecture is pretty, I'm just having done it yesterday or the day before. It is a lot of information because students ask a lot of questions. So just don't forget to, or don't be afraid to say any comments in the group chat, or turn on your mic and ask a question if you want me to slow down or you want to ask a specific thing about the material. So remember when we first introduced this course, we discussed that we would be looking at motor control from a behavioral or psychological aspect. So we're going to be studying the behavioral and neuromuscular mechanisms that are involved or interact together to coordinate or produce coordinated movement. So in terms of the questions that we want to answer when considering research in this field, we want to look at, yes, how is our body able to coordinate or flex specific muscles to move in the way that we want, and how we're able to refine those skills when we're learning a motor skill. But the studies are sort of looking at, well, what is specifically the nature of the command that's provided from our brain to the muscles? In the review lecture last week and in Intro to Movement Neuroscience, we learned about the actual, sort of tracks, or the upper motor neurons and then the lower motor neurons, the motor units that are involved with specifically activating different motor units or contracting our muscles in a specific way. But what is the nature of the command specifically when we are learning motor skills? So think about people that are learning to play soccer, or amateurs or young kids when they're learning a new sport. They're very uncoordinated. So as they get better, does the command that's coming from the brain change? Or is it the same and then your body is able, the timing's different, or are you able to incorporate more sensory processes, and so the command is the same but it's more refined? These are all the questions that will have to be answered, because it's ultimately more than just a checklist of muscles. There's an interaction of that checklist of muscles and what we pick out in the environment, and how we're able to put all of those together to complete that motor skill consistently in a varying degree of environmental conditions. And so that's the point here, the second point. How are we able, and the third point, how are we able to complete a task, the same motor skill, under a wide range of varying environmental conditions? So let's say someone that is very good at basketball, so a pro basketball player. They're able to do a free throw or a jump shot when there's no one around. They're also able to hit a jump shot with the same accuracy and consistency when they are running, or they have defenders in the way, or they're off balance, or I don't know, what other a stressful situation at the end of the game. So what's the difference in the control there? Is there obviously different things that the program or the motor skill has to incorporate when completing that task. So is the command different, or is it the same command but altered? Again, these are all the sort of questions that were initially asked and what research was trying to answer. And so when doing a theory is just a sort of a way to explain or describe a large class of behaviors. So when you observe a bunch of situations, you can develop a theory about a specific field or topic. And once you've pieced together a good enough observation to understand what you're observing, you can use that theory to make predictions about what would happen in future studies, or you can use that theory to make predictions that would happen in a new situation related to the topic that you're studying, right? And once this is a theory over a amount of time becomes a law. Motor control theories had to address motor control from a behavioral level. And like I was saying in the previous slide, they had two main aspects that they had to answer: the degrees of freedom problem and coordination. The degrees of freedom problem is related to the term degrees of freedom. And degrees of freedom means the number of independent elements of a system. So if we're looking at the looking at a goniometer, it's 2 degrees of freedom, because it can move in 2 different ways. If we're looking at the body, even just looking at like a simple thing of picking up a cup, okay? Think of the control of the body, the independent elements that would have to be controlled by the brain in even the simplest motor skill. We have one shoulder, one elbow, one wrist, and in the hand themselves, we have 4 fingers and a thumb. Each of the fingers has 3 joints. The thumb has joints, And so think of all of the different independent elements and all of the muscles associated with each of those, plus the core muscles. How is the brain able to send out a signal to all of these different areas at once? How is it able to look at what we want to do and figure out how to move each of those independent elements accurately to achieve a skill and achieve a skill consistently in a changing environment? It's a lot of information. And so at the time when all of this research started happening, they wanted to understand, how is the brain, how is the neuromuscular system able to process and then send out or control, process all of this information and then send out a signal to control the body accurately. The second question that these theories needed to answer was the same sort of observation that I keep discussing. That this idea of coordination, or coordinating the body in relation to changing environmental aspects. And so the term coordination can be used in different ways. The word coordination can be applied to sort of an adjective when someone is moving very smoothly or efficiently. We're saying they are coordinated in whatever aspect they're moving. In terms of motor control theories, the term coordination is defined as the patterning of the body and its elements or its joints in relation to the environmental objects of that situation. So coordination is talking about the body moving during a motor skill, but adjusting its movement patterns for that situation. So coordination in a basketball example would relate to the fact that the athlete is able to coordinate his body or her body or their body efficiently and with a high degree of accuracy, that they're able to complete a jump shot in a wide range of different or varying regulatory conditions of the environment. Does that make sense, everyone? Awesome. So let's talk about different control systems. So again, control theories had to answer how we're able to control so many things at once and how we're able to change that control based on a real-time situation and still perform as accurately as before. Now, in terms of how our body is controlling, or how our brain is controlling our body or the movement of our body, two observations were observed in early research, that humans can move quickly and independent of feedback, or they can move slowly and are highly dependent on feedback. And this relates to what was an observed characteristics of motor skill that we had discussed in previous lectures, the speed-accuracy trade-off. What do we notice about someone's movement patterns when they are trying to perform a motor skill accurately? They go slowly. And so why would that be? They might be moving slowly so they can be better able to get feedback from their sensory processes, whatever, depending on what they're doing, to sort of adjust their motor skill or their movement in real time to perform more accurately. So regardless of the control theory that was being developed, they had to answer two questions, and they had to incorporate two observable things that all researchers could agree on. That humans, or the motor control system, can work in both an open and closed loop system. And the difference between the open and closed loop system would be the nature of the instructions coming out. The control center would be the brain, and in a closed loop system, this would be something describing an accurate movement. A closed loop system is called closed loop because movement starts and then you're continuously getting feedback for the movement and then adjusting the movement patterns in real time to perform things accurately. So in this case, if you're working in a closed loop system, really the only instructions that had to come out from the brain initially would have to be the initial instruction to initiate movement, and then in real time there would be a constant adjustment. And what sort of sensory processes would we utilize when performing motor skills? Depends on the skill itself. So we could use any of the sensory processes that are available to us. An open loop system would be something where we're performing very quickly, speed accuracy trade-off. So something that is performed very quickly isn't very accurate, but the trade-off is that we can complete it with great speed. And in a open loop system, control is independent of feedback. It's done very quickly. And so in this case, the control center or the brain has to process all of the instructions to be sent out that is necessary for full completion of that movement. Remember we had discussed the one-dimensional systems, like discrete versus continuous, or gross scale versus fine scale, and then what's the other one? Open versus closed. Open versus closed environment is different than open closed loop. The loop means that, if you look at this slide right here, two different control systems. In a closed loop system, we're moving accurately because the brain sends out movement instructions to the body, and then in real time we're getting feedback and adjusting our movement. So it's a closed loop, circle, 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 circle. Whereas in an open loop system, the brain has processed the movement instructions for the full motor skill and then sent them out. And it's done quickly, and so there's no time for feedback. So in relation to the one-dimensional systems, maybe there's a transition from working in a closed loop to an open loop system. We had discussed the speed accuracy trade-off, but what are some other reasons as to why the brain or our body would choose to work in either an open or closed loop system? What about things that we are learning? So if open loop systems are like inner neurons, well, no, think of, the loop is just whether or not we are adjusting we're taking in sensory information and then adjusting our movements as we're performing the skill. So both would use inner neurons. And everything that we do in our neuromuscular system utilizes neurons. But think of it this way, where we have the brain, the body, this is movement. And so in a closed loop system, we're moving accurately. So movement is slower, but when we send out the instructions to the body, there's time for us to take in sensory information or feedback and then adjust our movement patterns. In an open loop system, we have the brain sending out instructions to the body, and then it's done. There's no feedback required. So think about when we're performing new versus well-learned skill. When we're practicing something that we've just learned, do we move slower or faster? So maybe the body's ability to work in either an open or closed loop system, like independent or dependent on feedback, is also based on how well we've learned the skill. Maybe we start off with a closed loop system. We have to start slower, get used to the feedback coming in so that we're aware of how we should regulate our bodies. And then as we get better and better, we don't need that feedback because our understanding of the motor pattern required to complete that skill with experience. Yes, that's right, Samantha. Right here, precision, so this is accuracy. So in a closed loop system, because we can, sort of minutely adjust the motor skill in real time, a high precision task would require, accuracy or a closed loop, whereas one that requires more speed, not accuracy, maybe, well, then in that case, you can work in an open loop system. What about skill type? So remember we talked about continuous versus discrete skills? What was the difference between the two, or define either? Someone in the class. What is a continuous skill versus a discrete skill? I know all y'all are opening up your lecture slides from the first lecture. That's good. Someone tell me, what is a continuous skill and what is the difference between that and a discrete skill? Right, so Megan, picking up a cup and dropping it, discrete skill. Discrete beginning and end. What about walking? It's a continuous skill because there's no specified beginning and end. It's sort of like a motor skill that is a repeated pattern. So if it's a repeated pattern, maybe you get the system going and then you're dependent on feedback. Whereas with like flicking on a light switch, which was the example from that lecture, or picking up a cup, what I just said right now, it's very quick and it has a discrete beginning and end. So maybe it doesn't need feedback. So maybe continuous skills use a more of a closed loop system, and discrete skills use more of an open loop system. But this is how research started, right? They have to answer the two questions, degrees of freedom and coordination, and they have to explain why the body and how the body is able to do either open or closed loop system based on the skill itself. And what are the factors behind that? Does that make sense, everyone? Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into the two main theories that were developed. Obviously, there was a bunch. Every university had their own sort of, any lab that was researching this had their own sort of ideas. And then they sort of all combined into two main theories. The motor program-based theory, which would suggest that just like a computer, for every motor skill that you learn, you remember a program. So just like a software, you upload it, or you load it, and your body is able to perform the skill that you've learned. Later on, like 15 years later and moving forward, there was more emphasis on what was called the dynamical systems theory. And what this theory emphasizes is that there is more of a role of sort of the patterning of, or the emergence of movement patterns in the environment. So if you get a system going, patterns of motion sort of just like emerge. And this was discussed in Megan Lloyd's class. And the reason why dynamical systems theory became popular, because they are similar in a sense, but dynamical systems theory is more based on this idea that once you get a system going and use feedback, movement patterns just sort of emerge. And the reason why this became popular was because very quickly when discussing motor program-based theory, it becomes very clear that the brain would have to memorize so much stuff. There has to be a way or a reason that each motor skill is less information than originally thought. And that came from this whole idea of dynamical systems theory. Okay, so this was the first one, motor program-based theory. And then as time has passed, it's become more of a dynamical systems-based theory. Both are sort of true. There's no set rule. And moving forward with the MEG machines, maybe we'll get a better idea of specifically what's going on in the brain and the nature of the instructions. So let's first talk about this idea of the motor program. So it was originally called the schema theory by Schmidt. And it was based on this concept of a generalized motor program, or a GMP. And so for every motor skill, regardless of sports, life stuff, brushing your teeth, anything that you've learned that requires learning a motor skill, learning and then performing a motor skill, you, with repetition, download a generalized motor program in your memory. And this program is going to be designed to figure out which muscles you have to contract to complete the skill. And remember, we said that we have to be able to discuss or understand how we're able to complete a skill under wide-ranging environmental conditions. This idea was that you had a program, and then you had schema, you had like sort of parameters that you would add to the program. So the parameters would include sort of the sensory information available to you about the environment in that situation, that the environment parameters are added to the program, and then your brain adds the two together and then sends out the signal of that skill for that situation, and then you can complete it accurately, much like a computer. Have you ever heard of this theory before? You have, Alexis? Oh, no, you were asking before. So the question then becomes, with this motor program-based theory, is, well, what counts as a different? So what counts as one motor skill and then versus another? Is jumping off two legs and then jumping off one leg the same motor skill, or is it different? Is me picking up this Starbucks cup, use a Tim's guy, but on Starbucks today, or picking up a mug, is right? So picking up a mug like this, is that two different motor skills, or is that the same motor skill? They didn't know. So they said, yeah, so probably different. Motor program-based theory would say that those are all different motor skills because they have different invariant features. They would describe one motor skill or one motor program, so a program for one motor skill, as having the invariant features. And the invariant features would be the defining characteristics or movement patterns of that motor skill that wouldn't vary across performances of that same skill. The parameters, like I had mentioned in the previous slide, parameters were the specific features of the environment that would be added to the motor program to complete the motor skill in that particular situation. So the idea of like sort of invariant features would be something like the waltz would be an example, right? So I don't know if there's any dancers in the class. I think there was one. We all know the waltz, right? So it is based on a specific rhythm, the timing, 3 beats for every measure. Think of the Disney movies. So that beat structure would be the invariant feature of the waltz. Think of the parameter as the tempo, so how fast it is. If it lets you speed up the music, it still has that same rhythm structure. So it's still the waltz, so it's still the same motor skill, but the parameter of speed has been put on top of our tempo. What about using a similar example like this visual here? So let's say this is another type of dance, like sort of like a TikTok dance, okay? So it would involve this move here for 30%, then this move here for 20%, this move, and then this move. So the invariant features of that motor skill, in this case, a particular dance meme or viral dance thing, it has its distinguishing features to make it that dance. You can either speed it up or slow it down, but it's still the same dance moves. So each of these would be the same motor skill, the same generalized motor program. And in this case, in the previous example, the parameter or the environmental condition added on top of it would be the speed. Does that make sense? Everyone? Good. So let's think about like a real world example, okay? Let's talk about walking, okay? So there was this one study where they were looking at walking on a treadmill at different speeds and continuing until there was a run. And so what they wanted to do was look at the gait cycle. So have you had biomechanics, or have you analyzed like the gait cycle or the step cycle in any of your courses? So there's like a stance phase, swing phase, right? There's like the set sort of movement patterns. And so what this study wanted to look at was like, okay, so at different speeds of walking, that step cycle stays the same. It's obviously faster, but the percentage of time spent in each phase stays the same. So at different speeds of walking, they found that the participants had the same invariant features, except once they kept speeding up the treadmill, it got to a point where individually the different participants would start running. And then the running would have different invariant features, different step cycle. And then that pattern would stay the same for different speeds of running. So in this case, would they say that walking and running are the same motor program, or they're two different motor programs? Two different ones, right? So Ahmed's saying they're the same. Well, no, because they're saying that each motor program has its similar invariant features or patternings of the body that are specific to that motor skill. Because those invariant features are changed in running, then it is two different. Yeah, the gait's different. So in that case, running and walking would be two different motor programs. Does that make sense, Ahmed? But this was the problem. This is the problem with the motor program based theory, because very quickly for every little thing that we do, obviously there's gonna be different motor programs. How is your brain, or your cerebellum in this case, able to process and memorize all of that? That's so much. Megan's next question: would that have to do with both feet being on the ground at one time and walking out? Yeah, it would just be like, so if you watch a stick figure slow down versus like, so the feet are going like this, or the legs moving when they're running, it probably looks different, right? So because this isn't like gait cycle that we've learned in biomechanics, I'm not sure what specifically they did, but obviously the invariant features of the patternings that they were measuring changed. So maybe it was what you said, Megan. I don't really know. It could be. But dynamical systems theory suggests that, okay, so if you're walking down the hallway, and then you look at, so you're going to class, Megan, you're walking, and then, okay, as an example, something where you're going down the hallway, you look at the time and you're like, oh shit, I'm late. You're gonna speed up, and then eventually you just start running. Could we argue that you don't think to yourself, okay, I'm walking faster, and then eventually you start like a jog, and then you start running? It kind of just happens, right? So dynamical system-based theory suggests that with this, the signal stays the same, and as you change the parameter of speed, a new pattern of movement happens. So therefore, it's a way to decrease the number of programs you would have to memorize. But we're talking about program-based theory, and this is what the argument they made. So that for every class of movement, there was or motor skill, there would be distinguishing invariant features defined by this. And then you would take parameters, which is the environmental conditions of that situation, and put it on top of the program, and then that's how you control your body for that instance. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's the point, right? So very quickly, early on in research, Ahmed is right. They realized that, oh my gosh, like, I feel like this is probably way too much for the brain to process. We have a hard time like talking on the phone and driving. But here's another another example of this whole idea of like something being downloaded into your brain. Have you ever tried? Okay, I want all of you to take a pencil. I don't like, you can put your cameras on if you want. Take a pencil and then sign your name, and now sign your name with the other hand, and then sign your name with your teeth if you want. This study looked at people writing with the different limbs and reverse and backwards, and they realized that the actual sort of like cursive writing style looked the same regardless of what limb the participant was choosing to write with. So clearly our signature or the writing style or cursive writing style, our handwriting is downloaded. That's what's memorized in our brain. And then the parameter would technically be, the limb we're choosing to carry out that, that program. So if you write on a board or on a piece of paper or on, someone's cast, it looks the same, right? You can tell someone's writing style. Can we all agree with that? And that would be because you're not used to it. You're not used to the proprioception, but yes. But if you look like in the same thing here, like you look at right versus left, the writing is a lot more terrible. However, the sort of like elements of the handwriting style is the same. So it just goes to prove that the handwriting style is what's downloaded in our brain. So that's like sort of like a defense of the motor program. Yeah, like the pattern's the same invariant features. So it doesn't matter what limb you write with, technically the pattern is the same. Make sense? Just as an example of motor program-based theory. And then a parameter is what's added on top of the program to complete the motor skill. So the parameter in this case is what muscles or body part you want to use to write, but the pattern is the same. So the pattern is the invariant features, the pattern is a program, and then the parameter, in this case, the limb you want to use. Does that make sense? Boom. So, like Ahmed was saying earlier, you need mega brain if you're going to memorize all of that information. Right? Like, can we all agree on that? That seems like, even just in like this brief 5-slide example, that's a lot. Brushing your teeth, picking up a cup. Like, think of everything you've ever had to do, doing buttons, zipping a zipper, like everything, which is like everything has to be downloaded in the brain. It's too much. And so that's why over time, motor control researchers tried to get into or develop this whole idea of what's called dynamical systems theory. And what this suggests or is utilizing this whole idea of self-organization, that once you get a system moving, that patterns of movement sort of just emerge. So the difference with dynamical systems-based theory is that we don't have to, like in terms of the degrees of freedom problem, you don't have to minutely control everything as specifically because patterns of movement sort of just emerge a little bit. And then it decreases the amount of motor skills or motor programs we're remembering because as you change parameters, sometimes new patterns of movement just emerge. So it's the same motor skill, like walking versus running, same motor skill, just different pattern of motion. Just like with the example of like jumping off 2 legs versus 1 leg. Motor program-based theory says it's 1 program. Dynamical systems theory says it's 2 programs or 2 motor skills, whereas dynamical systems theory would say it's 1. And so with dynamical systems theory in relation to motor control, they're suggesting that the way that our body is situated or controlled and how we have with inner neurons, so I think it was Michaela that was talking about inner neurons before, but with all of the sort of reflexes and motion being contributed by afferent information at the spinal cord adjusting movement patterns, that patterns of movement sort of just emerge with the same, output. So that the amount of information sent out by the control center or the brain is less. Does that make sense, everyone? Hopefully I didn't make it too confusing. Yes. Yeah. So instead of saying pick up mug, pick up cup, pick up bowling ball, pick up screwdriver, it's just pick up. Does everyone get that? Dynamical systems theory. Everyone gets that? Yeah. Which part, Mikhail? Which part don't you understand? Okay. No, that's okay. So there's two main theories. Motor program-based theories say that for every motor skill you've ever learned, you have to download a motor program. Each motor skill is defined by specific invariant features, patterns of movements like walking versus running. Whereas dynamical systems theory says that obviously by trying to develop a memory program for every motor skill you've ever learned, it's a lot of information. So dynamical systems theory suggests that there's a less number of things that you're memorizing and movement patterns just sort of emerge. So it's the same output. Your body is just dealing with the emergence of different motor patterns or different movement patterns based on the situation and afferent information adjusting the movement. So just look at the writing style. So if you write your name, if you sign your name and then someone else signs Megan, you're going to tell who wrote which, right? You're going to be able to see if you wrote it versus someone else. Everyone has their own handwriting style. So it's the handwriting style that's downloaded in our brain. Right, so Megan, if you write your name or write anything, if you write anything with your left hand, your right hand, if you put a pen in your foot, and did it look? It obviously looks different, but the actual patterning of how you choose to write the letters is the same. So that's what's downloaded in your brain. Yeah. There's a video sort of discussing this whole idea of self-organization. And I'm not going to play it. It's like 15 minutes long. I'm not going to play it in the lecture, but you can go back and sort of read it. It was an old PBS thing. The one good thing about sort of the progression from motor program-based theory to dynamical systems-based theory is that because it was more science-based, think about research, how it started off in behavioral psychology and sort of has now progressed to kinesiology, and look at how sciencey we've become now. That in the transition to dynamical systems theory, we've observed many things and put a scientific spin on sort of the things that we've observed. Jay was asking, so basically the body sends out a motor command that is adjusted by the environment and the muscles used. In dynamical systems-based theory, yeah. Whereas motor program-based theory would say that it's the brain has to process everything and sends the signals out. So it's less based on sensory information. You want to know what's okay, so sidebar, timeout. You want to know something that's super weird? We're going to get into robotics and how learning how to use robotics relates to motor control, because once we understand how robots work and make them work efficiently, it's like how our bodies work. So think of something like a drone. So you have a drone, right? Motor program-based theory, so there's 4 propellers, would say that there's the microchip in the middle that's controlling the 4 different fans and making sure everything's level. but it's too much processing for the drone to figure out like wind, direction, controls, plus adjust like how each of the different propellers, the 4 of them, are changing. A drone works because you have each of the 4 propellers. They just controlling themselves, and then there's the center that sends out the instructions coming from the controls, move forward, and the 4 propellers are adjusting themselves. Sidebar. So that's how our bodies work. Anyway, back to the lecture. Talking about dynamical systems-based theory. And so their idea of a stable state of motion is called an attractor state. So in dynamical systems-based theory, remember how they would suggest then that walking and running is the same? So it's the same command, but based on speed, different attractor states can happen. And those attractor states would be walking versus running. So an attractor state would represent a stable state of motion that's defined by different order parameters. So with Megan's question, so she's asking, does everything work independently with a central system? Yes, we've realized over time that that's the most efficient way for things to work, even in cars. You have everything sort of working independently on specific aspects, and then you have a central executive that sort of drives it. You can't have one area do everything. It's too much information. So just to get back to dynamical systems-based theory, they have different terminology. So remember motor program-based theory, they said that each motor skill is defined by invariant features, and you have parameters or the environment information that's added on top. Dynamical systems-based theory changed the terminology a bit and just says that we have movement patterns or motor skills that are identified by order parameters, and the stable states of motion are the attractor states. So with locomotion, based on speed, you can have different attractor states of walking or running. And walking would be demonstrate these or be identifiable by different order parameters or gait cycle, whereas running, still the same motor skill, but it's a different attractor state. And it's defined by its order parameters. The control parameters in this case would be what is being taken in from the environment. In that case, speed. So here's an example. This is legit what started off this whole idea. So I want you to all bring up your fingers like this. Okay? You can do it you could even do it like this. Okay? So everyone's doing this, right? So you're supposed to have a metronome, and then what you're supposed to do is all you want to do is go in anti-phase. So you want to move your fingers. I hope I'm on camera. Like this, opposite, okay? So with every second, go a little faster, and then very quickly, it switches to your fingers moving together. Even though you haven't told your brain to do that, it just sort of happens. Right. Who did it? So you're moving your fingers opposite phase, and then as you speed it up, it's hard to do. Eventually, your fingers start moving together, even though you haven't told them. You haven't like told your body to do that. It just kind of happens. Anyone try it? Weird, right? Super weird. Someone got a PhD for that. But it sort of just proves that, like, obviously, with motor program-based theory, it's too much information. There's something that's missing, and it's dynamical systems theory that has figured out that there's other variables. Okay, so I want you to practice, Casey, for the full rest of the lecture, and let me know. Let me know. You probably could, but I don't know. This is a good question. Ask Kelso in his PhD in 1984. So now do we all get the idea or the example of this whole gait transition thing where it's the same motor skill, however, there's different attractor states based on the changing control parameter in that case, which is speed. Yeah, that's what they're saying. So it's speed. So Ahmed is saying, well, like he feels speed is the factor that now changes the fingers to move at in the same way. Yes, that's exactly that's exactly the point. So if you are instead of doing this, imagine walking. Now I'm going to get you on a treadmill and I'm going to say just walk. And then I'm going to slowly speed up the treadmill. I'm just changing the control parameter, which is speed. Eventually, your legs are just going to start running. Yeah? Same idea. And in this case, the same thing. They've also demonstrated this in swimming. So this whole gait transition with swimming. Yes, that's right, Casey. So the speed would be a factor in when the fingers become synchronized. Even though your brain isn't, like you haven't told your brain to do that, it just sort of happens. Everyone okay? So like I said, instead of saying invariant features, dynamical systems-based theory defines an attractor state with order parameters instead. And then instead of saying parameter, they say control parameter as the variables that's added on from the environment. It's changing the control parameter in the examples we've talked about is speed, but by adjusting the control parameters, you potentially disrupt the system to develop a new attractor state or stable state of motion. They had some really interesting sort of research that came out of this theory. Has anyone ever worn a cast before? So when you put a cast on your leg, Alexis, Megan, and Michaela, did you have to relearn to walk or did you just sort of start hobbling around? Right. So motor program-based theory would say that if you have a cast on, it's obviously going to be a different invariant features. So then you have to relearn a motor skill. That's not what happens. You don't like practice. It's not like relearning to walk. You kind of just start doing it. And so, right. So Michaela's agreeing with me. You just kind of adapt to it, right? So your body, it's the same motor output, right? In terms, it's the same control mechanism, but your body adapts to the situation and just a new pattern of movement just sort of just happens. And so they're suggesting that this is called, in terms of like the interplay between the muscles, this is called coordinated structures or muscle synergies. And so that the control center is just still sending out the same signal, but the muscles work as a functional unit, whereas if one's not working, the rest will figure it out, right? And that probably happens at a spinal cord level. Does that make sense? You don't tell yourself, okay, I need to relearn how to walk. And when someone puts on a cast, you observe them, and it's not like they're relearning how to walk. They just adapt. So that supports this whole idea of dynamical systems-based theory, where in this case, you're able to utilize whatever muscles are available, and then the pattern continues. So dynamical systems-based theory also started off the term perception-action coupling. So it started because it was talking about how different environmental features are incorporated when completing the same skill that you're practicing or same skill that you've learned. It came up with the term perception-action coupling. And so it's saying that once we get the system going, we're able to perceive and adjust our motor skill based on our perception. So when I am playing baseball and I'm about to hit the ball, attractor state. So Jacob's asking a question. Well, no, the attractor state is the state of is the there are the same thing. The attractor state is a way to describe a stable state. So walking and running are two different attractor states. The order parameters are what would define that. So the gait cycle. The order parameters are the ways to describe the attractor state. Yeah. Perception and action coupling is the observation that we take a motor skill and then we are able to adjust that motor skill based on our perception. So if I'm walking and I am going to, I'm crossing the street and I'm about to step over a curb. Do I look at the curb and tell myself, oh, there is a curb coming, I must now step and then continue walking? Because remember, motor program-based theory means that everything that has different invariant features is a new motor program, right? So motor program-based theories would say that if I'm crossing the street and I get to a curb, it's walking, then it's stepping, and then walking. So two different motor skills. Dynamical systems-based theory says that it's just locomotion, right? It's one signal and your body's adapting. So based on what you're perceiving, your body adapts. Perception, action, coupling. So when I'm walking, I perceive that a step is coming up, and then my body subconsciously just readjusts to it. Does that make sense? Everyone? Here's an example. What about, so there was this other study called affordances. Casey's asking, are we able to adjust just because past some experiences? Yep. Yep. So this whole idea of affordances, this came from a study where they had people walking around. So they had walking and they had to walk through a door frame. So they had a door, and what they would do is they would shrink the frame of the door. And so they would walk to see how people were walking, and then they would shrink the door frame, and eventually people would realize they had to walk sideways through it because it was too thin. But they didn't walk up and then judge the door frame. They instinctively understood how their body fits in with the environment. And so they would just have people walking, and when it got to a certain degree of, closeness to what their like sort of threshold would be before they would hit their arms, people just instinctively knew and then would just turn. They did another study where it was like steps. So they would have people stepping over a curb, right? So they would walk over it, and then they would increase the height of the curb until people wouldn't be able to just step over it. They had to step up on top. But they would know. Weird, right? Our body understand. So it's somewhere in the neuromuscular system and then our brain and everything, we understand our relation of our body to the environment. And maybe that's what the experience too does. Does that make sense? This term affordances is that we understand the reciprocal fit between our characteristics and the environment. Always dream big, Casey. Don't ever doubt yourself. Aim big. You do anything you want. You can do anything you want. Just not go to some of the classes that are striking right now. So that's the two different theories. And in reality, it's obviously what's really going on in that last slide is that the interplay between all of those, right? Nothing's a law right now. And then moving forward, we're still going to condense and figure out more about, because there's still obviously tons of questions that we don't know about. But that was the introduction to how we went from behavioral psychology to science, kinesiology, and motor control research. That make sense, everyone? So far, so good? I feel like this lecture is going, I feel bad for the other class. because it's just a lot of information, right? So I got to figure out, I got to piece together which parts I feel as those students will understand and I can elaborate on, and other parts that you guys would pick up quicker. You all felt okay? Perfect. So the next half of the lecture, well, the last third of the lecture, we're going to be talking about sensory components. So with dynamical systems-based theory, we're talking about how so much of the environment is important when performing motor skills. And even with motor program-based theory, you had to be aware of the environment to figure out what to add to the program to be able to complete it. And so obviously our body first starts off using sensory processes. We need to be aware of the environment in the beginning of a motor skill to figure out what was required for the movement. During the movement, if we're doing something very accurately, we need to be aware of our sensory process because it provides feedback for adjusting the motor skill in real time. And then we can also use sensory information after a motor skill has been completed to kind of figure out, okay, we should have done this better, or provide movement information so that we can adjust our motor skill to be more accurate the next time. Today, we're going to be talking about our three main sensory processes that we utilize in motor skills. We use sound as well, but we're going to be talking about touch, vision, and proprioception. The three sort of sensory processes that have been studied the most when looking at motor skills. So what do you all think touch provides to motor skills? Is it important? Is it not important? When your sense of surrounding, it gives you feedback when you're gripping, right? But it helps with texture, heat for sure. So obviously touch is something because orientation to environment. When people are in a dark space and they can't see, then they touch because it gives them a sort of an awareness. Actually, for probably all of those things. But initially, when motor control research was getting started, they wanted to look at, well, what does touch actually do? Like, how much do we really utilize of our different sensory processes, right? One thing that we realized initially was that we all tend to use vision as primary. But how much is touch important? If all of a sudden you didn't have touch, could you still pick up a cup? Let's study it, right? So touch is coming through our skin receptors. This is sort of a review from Intro to Movement Neuroscience, but we have all of these sensory receptors for touch in our skin, and then that gives us that information being sent up to the somatosensory system, and then we're aware of what we're touching, right? Fine touch, temperature, pain, vibration. That's the information provided by touch receptors. And initially, touch was easy to study because we just have like lidocaine or different like numbing medications. So what researchers would do is they would have participants doing different types of motor skills, see how they do, and then put anesthetic in their fingertips and then make them do it again and see what changed. Yeah, exactly. Casey's saying how walking on a foam pad where you don't get the same touch awareness, it's much more difficult. So the typical research techniques, like I said, were looking at motor skills that involve touch and then anesthetizing the fingers and seeing what happens, or adding touch to a motor skill and seeing how it changed. And this is what they found. So they found like a whole bunch of weird, different sort of intriguing things. So think of typing. So they looked at typing for a keyboard, and they looked at some studies were piano players, and they put like lidocaine and anesthetized their fingers and looked at the what would happen. And Megan was saying accuracy. The type. So I don't know what you guys would think, but the accuracy of someone's typing the words that they typed, it became inaccurate. So they lost accuracy by removing touch from typing and piano playing. So just the feedback of touch from your fingers, it limited accuracy in that motor skill. Yes, and that's why I talked about that in the previous class, Casey. So remember the laser keyboards where they would like project a keyboard onto the table or in the air, and then you would like air type or type off the table. Your typing is not as accurate because you don't get the feedback from feeling the keys move. Our neuromuscular system tends to utilize as much sensory information that's available. So, and we're also better at understanding endpoints. So like, I don't know if anyone's like dancers or if you're trying to like golfers or if you're trying to train someone to do a particular movement pattern, you move their limb, you say this is the beginning, this is the end. Humans tend to remember when we show the endpoints, the beginning and end points of movement. We remember like the end, the beginning and end versus distances. So by having the keys and the feedback of touch, typing and piano playing in this case were more accurate. And they knew that because as soon as they put the anesthetizing medication in their fingers, their accuracy decreased. That's a good, yeah, probably. It would probably actually help, yeah. Is that what they did? Because then it's like taking one sensory processes and converting to another. It may work better, who knows? You're like changing one sensory information for another. The other thing too is that, so you know how when we're typing, I don't know if you can see, you're supposed to you put your index fingers on F and J, and then that's where you're supposed to stay when you're typing. When the fingers were numbed, not only was the accuracy of how they hit the keys changed, but the position of their hands would also move. So the consistency in their movements was altered. They used another study where they had people drawing a circle. So they had to like draw a circle at a specific, so they would have a metronome, draw a circle, or I think it was like that. They had to move their hand in a circle, and so they timed their circle drawing in the air, and then they added touch. So then at the top there was a like a little Velcro pad that would touch, and by having the touch at the top, it improved their timing. And then the last study was that they had like gripping motor skills, and then what would happen is that when we grip something, touch gives us feedback that we're holding an object with the right amount of force. Because if we don't, we want to hold it with as much force to keep it up without doing too much, because then it's pointless. So then what they found was that if you take touch away from the fingertips, people would be dropping the whatever they're grasping. Does that make sense? Well, so we would, because remember, joints and muscles are proprioceptive receptors. So if I'm gripping, my fingers aren't moving. So the joints and the muscles are not changing length, and the joints aren't changing position. So they're staying the same. If I grip hard or less, do it. Grip a cup and hard or less. And close your eyes. You're feeling the pressure. You're not feeling a change in your joints. Joints and muscles would give us proprioception. So unless you're leading me into the next slide. Hype man, thank you. So what about proprioception? What is the term proprioception? What does it mean as a sense? Yeah, knowing where our body is in space. And so position space, exactly. So if you close your eyes and lift up your arms, or we do this with patients to see if the proprioceptive system is working. Like diabetic patients, I'll grab their foot and then I'll say, close your eyes, and I'll move their toe. Is your toe up or down? If they can tell me, then they have proprioception. If they can't tell me, something's effed. So we get our proprioception information, or our sense of proprioception, through our proprioceptive receptors. So like Malak was saying, muscles and joints. We get our muscle spindles primarily. We have our Golgi tendon organs, our joint receptors. The clinical thing, if you want to test someone's proprioception clinically, in a diabetic patient, their feet are always have a neuropathy, you would just have them close their eyes, and then you would, so imagine this is a foot, close your eyes, patient, and then you take their big toe and you move it up, or sorry, down or up. You make them tell you which way you move their toe. If they can tell you, then they can obviously have proprioception. If they don't, then something is wrong. Yeah. That's an example of proprioception, right? We have an awareness of our body and how it's positioned in space. The main receptor that does that is muscle spindles, and we talked about that last day. But there's also our joint receptors and our tendon receptors. So how is proprioception utilized in motor control, do you think? Is it important? Is it not important? Yeah, it's obviously very important. And we find that by utilizing proprioception is how we better learn efficiency. So we've learned is that as we get better at a motor skill, we will rely less on vision, and then we can rely more on proprioception. So proprioception is obviously giving us, but also our cerebellum, that feedback of position of body. You could say it's probably the most important for well-learned skills than vision, yeah? Vision is primary. So it's not what's most important, because I guess most important would be for that skill, most important to the body. Vision is used primarily, and we'll talk about that last, obviously. But studying proprioception is a lot more difficult because you can't anesthetize someone's proprioceptive system. In monkeys, what they used to do was they used to cut the dorsal. So they would have monkeys do like a motor control task and then cut their dorsal column and then see what happens. It's not really a good thing. The only way to really test a loss of someone moving with a loss of proprioception is using diabetic patients because they have a sensory neuropathy. And like there's different size of sensory fibers. The largest sensory neurons are the proprioceptive ones, so they would be affected first in diabetic neuropathy. And that's why some of them were used a lot in early research. And so in this research, I said this last class, I'm gonna post this study. And what they did was they had a diabetic patient that had a sensory neuropathy, no proprioception, and then they had a control. And so what they did was they had someone sitting at a desk like this, and then they had to move a lever between two different light points. And they did it with lights on, with the lights off. And what they found was that when vision was available, that both the person with proprioception and the person without proprioception performed similarly. But when they had no vision, forcing the person to rely on proprioception, the diabetic person performed like significantly poorly. Other ways you can study proprioception are tendon vibration. And I think Haley posted in, oh no, wrong class, but she might post in this class too. But in Bernadette's lab, she's doing vibration in the neck to affect proprioception. Is proprioception of the neck important? So they were having, in this study, people doing circle drawing. And by having tendon vibration, it limits proprioception. And so the proprioception in this case, they had their eyes closed and they were making circles to see if they could be consistent by having the vibration on their arm. They didn't really realize that their arm was moving. So proprioception in terms of motor skills provides feedback, obviously, of how our body's moving. And so it's going to be important for accuracy, timing, and coordination. This study was pretty interesting. What they did was sort of a weird one. So what they did was they had, let me fix my tags pants. They had to, all they did is they had a metronome, and then they had regular participants, and then the similar types of patients with diabetic neuropathy. And so what they had to do was they had to raise their hand and lift their leg at the same time. But their leg, and I think it was like this, the foot and their finger had to reach max height at the same time to the metronome. So beep, 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 and they watched them do that for however many cycles. Then they had the diabetic neuropathy patients do the same thing. And what they found was because it took the leg longer, or because it took the leg more time to get up to the same spot, the regular participants would start moving their leg first, so that way they would reach max height at the same time, at the metronome beat. Diabetic neuropathy patients, their timing was off, so they would start initiating movement at the same time, and so their foot would be like this. No, it would be, yeah, like that up. The timing was off. Because instinctively, the regular participants would realize that moving your leg took longer than moving your hand, so they would instinctively move their foot first, whereas the diabetic patients didn't really realize the timing because they couldn't get the movement feedback from their proprioceptive receptors. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone? You guys are all asleep. Okay, perfect. No, it would just be certain ones. So Megan's asking if all diabetics have proprioceptive loss. Look, a lot of people that have diabetes have it managed, and so they don't have any neuropathy. But diabetic neuropathy is so common. And with diabetic neuropathy, it affects the proprioceptive neurons first. So that's what they were used in research. So Malak is asking, does it matter what type of diabetes or no? No, it's how much the diabetes has progressed. And then Casey is asking, would they have somatosensory deficiency as well? Well, somatosensory deficiency, what do you mean? Like, if it's, so think of it as a spectrum. So they would first, because it's based on the size of the neurons. So the reason why diabetic neuropathy, this is going off topic now, but the reason why diabetic neuropathy happens is because having sugar in the blood, the sugar molecule is sharp. So having more sugar in the blood, it cuts the inside of your capillaries. And so you have loss of blood flow to your hands and feet because that's where the smallest capillaries are. And so when you have loss of blood, the first thing that is affected is the neurological system because it uses the most energy. And so when looking at the neurological system, the biggest neurons are affected first, and then it goes down the chain. So then you would start off with proprioception, and then touch, and then motor, and then continue on. Oh, no. So for, you want to see if they, so she's asking, or he asking, I was thinking of the toe example. So you were just using that to, as an example clinically to see if they have proprioception or not. So you could be diabetic and not have a neuropathy, then you don't have proprioceptive loss. You could have proprioceptive loss and not have diabetes. You could have another reason why you're having neuron issues. Make sense? Everyone, make sense? Awesome. Okay, so let's finish up now with vision. So vision is actually primary for us because it gives such a high def or intense amount of information from that sensory process. Our body has utilized it the most. We've evolved to use vision as primary. And then the sensory receptor for vision is the eyes. We use our eyes to pick up vision, right? So this isn't an anatomy class or biology class, but we have two eyeballs, and that information is sent through the optic nerves to the occipital lobe, and we process vision with great definition. We understand that vision is primary because of observations that we've made with people and even ourselves performing motor skills. When we are learning to type, we are watching the keyboard, and as you get better, then you can stop looking. That's true for so many different motor skills. Even with dancers, when dancers are starting to do, a new dance moves, or they're learning, they'll look at their feet, or they're looking at the movement of their body. And then as they get more experience, they can rely more on proprioception, and vision can now look at other things. Same thing with learning, think about hockey players or basketball players, right? Learning to dribble or learning to handle a puck. They're looking at it, and then eventually, as they get better, they don't need to look. They can rely more on the proprioception. One experiment that proved this was the moving room experiment. This is in 1974, and it's been repeated in a bunch of different ways. Children, non-children, adults. But what it is this room right here, and then see how it's on tracks. So the whole room moves. And so what happens is that the wall is demonstrating movement, whereas because the ground isn't moving, your proprioceptive and your touch information wouldn't be telling you that you're moving. And so what they did was they had this experiment where they would have the wall moving close to the participant, so children or adults. And because the wall moving would give you the visual feedback that you're moving, the participants would adjust or fall, even though touch or proprioception would be telling them that, well, you're not moving, it's just vision. Same thing when you're sitting in a car and the car beside you is moving slowly, and then you freak out because you think that you're moving. Vision is telling you you're moving. Touch and probably everything else is not telling you you're moving. But our body puts primary importance on vision. So this is very important. So back to Ahmed's question, our body puts most importance on the information provided by vision. So a lot of different motor skills are studied in terms of adding what vision is providing when doing motor skills using these eye tracking devices. And what they do is, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these before, but they track foveal vision. So they track at the iris and which way they're moving. What it does is they're utilized in motor control research because they have people doing motor skills, and then they're tracking what the eyes are looking at. And then they're comparing amateurs versus pros, or what changes as you learn. This is the most recent technique. They used to do the other ways to sort of analyze how vision is utilized in motor skills is these temporal techniques, where you do a motor skill and then you black out vision at certain times. So you could use these glasses that were developed, and what they do is they black out very quickly. And so you have someone doing a motor skill, and then you would black out vision at different phases of the motor skill. And if it affected the completion of that task or the accuracy of that task, then whatever happened just before that visually is clearly the most important for that motor skill. I have a video here of a temporal occlusion technique with Cristiano Ronaldo. So it's a super dope video. Can I play it for you guys? And so yes, so the whole point of this part of the lecture is we're talking about sensory processes. We've talked about touch, we've talked about proprioception, and now we're talking about vision. Vision is the most important, and we know this through the studies that have been produced. And ways that we have studied it are the goggles to look at what we're looking at, occlusion techniques like this, and then let let me show you how it works. And I jinxed it. Okay, perfect.
So Ronaldo's vast experience gives him the ability to intuitively read the game under normal conditions. But what if the conditions are very far from normal? Can Ronaldo still hit the back of the net if all the lights are turned off and he's in complete darkness?
Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to have Andy feeding the balls in as if it's a cross, and then sometime in the ball flight, the lights are going to go black, so you won't be able to see anything at all. We're expecting you to be able to put the ball in the goal. That's what we're hoping will happen. We're hoping that you'll have picked up some advanced cues from Andy's body position, the shapes, the positioning of his feet and his hips, and therefore will be able to tell exactly where the ball's going to go and get yourself in the right position, even though you can't see it.
Okay. Taking Ronaldo on in this seemingly impossible test is an amateur footballer called Ronald.
Come and join me, Ronald. Ronaldo. So we've got Ronald in here, same age as you, roughly the same height. We're going to use Ronald as a comparison and see how he reacts doing this same test.
Ronald is going first.
Dark! Light! Light!
So what does the night vision reveal? Ronald misses the ball by quite a way. Perhaps not that surprising. But can Ronaldo do any better?
I hope to do once.
Dark! Light!
Alright, that's one straight in the bag.
The night vision replay shows how differently Ronaldo performs. To confirm that wasn't just luck, another attempt.
Dark! Light!
Love that. Be careful.
And the replay?
How hard is that? It's difficult because it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Because you are focusing the ball and after don't light you have to try to memorize the ball.
Human reaction time is about 200 milliseconds, and by 500 milliseconds, Ronaldo's subconscious has interpreted Andy's body language, worked out which direction the ball will go in, calculated its speed and trajectory, and then programmed his body to reach it at the optimum moment.
Stop that!
It's almost as if they're doing maths in their head, even though they wouldn't be able to describe it to you. You could see from their performance that Ronaldo saw the first part of the ball flight information. He picked up information from Andy kicking the ball and was able to move his body into the correct position. This is because he's processed the information. He has experience of where the ball is likely to go. He's able to analyze all that as it's coming towards him and therefore connect successfully with the ball.
Stop that!
Ronald, on the other hand, doesn't have the same level of experience. He would have watched the ball flight. It's likely that he will just have had his eyes on the ball instead of picking up any information from Andy himself. And then when the lights go down and it's black, he's kind of stranded in no man's land a little bit and just has to do his best to react, but is naturally going to struggle with that.
So far, the lights have been shut off when the ball is in midair, but now the lights will be turned off just at the moment Andy kicks it. Can Ronaldo score with only Andy's body language to go on?
There you go, we'll get one. We're good?
Yeah, good.
Okay, Ronaldo.
Dark! Light!
Light. Ronaldo, pull it in. What was that, a shoulder? Great finish, great finish. was a great finish.
This is great because I imagine the ball is coming. I'm scared to go with the face, so I'll go with half chest, half shoulder, and then put the ball inside.
Quality, great finish. So tell me, how difficult is that? I mean, the last one when we adjusted the time of the line.
Yeah, it's so difficult. They've done studies like this using computer simulations. So you watch it on a computer and just have to say where the ball's going. And from then they can see that elite athletes can tell much earlier where the ball's coming from. But to have to actually produce a physical...
Interesting, right? So what do you think this means? That means that the athletes, so in comparison of Ronald in this case, the guy from the video, or Ronaldo, he was able to pick out, in the same amount of time visually, he was able to pick out more important things from the environment. And so vision is important in motor skills. And it's not only the amount of time of vision, but it's how to utilize vision. And so as you become better at a motor skill, with experience, you realize what is most important from the environment to pick out as it pertains to that motor skill. And this is what the research has shown us when analyzing vision and motor skill performance, is that vision is sort of looking all over the place as you're learning. And then as you get better and better, you're able to pick out in the environment what's most important, or you don't have to utilize vision as much because you're quickly able to pick out in the environment what's required, and then you can continue on. Just like how many coaches or athletes always say, as you get better at the game slows down. Time hasn't slowed down. It's that they're now less focused on random things and they can be more efficient with their timing. Does that make sense, everyone? In relation to vision? So you take those goggles. The goggles are looking at what people are focusing in on, right? So you take an amateur and a pro, or you watch someone's vision as they are learning a motor skill and how it changes. And the pupils would be all erratic and looking all over the place in amateurs, and very specific to individual things in the environment or the regulatory conditions in pros. And so she had said that in previous studies, what they used to do was like this. They would have, this is an example of a badminton player. So they would use very good badminton players. And so what they would do is they would have them watching a screen and they would say, okay, here's a bunch of trials. Is the birdie going to go to the left or right side? Which way are you going to have to move to sort of hit this birdie back? And then they would black out certain aspects of the video. So the arm, the racket, the guy's head, the lower body, I don't know what that is, but they would black out certain aspects and then see if the person's guessing, the player's guessing of which way the ball or the birdie was going to go is less accurate. And so clearly if it is, then clearly that's what the athlete is looking at. Oh, okay, so what did you do, Samantha? That's cool. So Samantha was doing this in one of the labs. What were they doing? I can't remember. I honestly think you told me about it. Was it with Rafida and Devante? I think Rafida was looking at vestibular ocular reflex. I can't remember. But similar, yeah, this is all motor control research, right? Okay, we're just finishing off this lecture now with the last two little things. What do you think having two eyes provides us? Versus depth, yeah. So by having binocular vision or two eyes, because you're relating vision from one eye to another, it gives us depth perception. And we're able to judge distances well as humans because we have binocular vision. When we don't have binocular vision available to us for whatever reason, we lose some of that depth perception. The way that we've realized that our vision evolved was we have two streams of vision. We have our central vision, or what we're focusing in on, and then we have our peripheral vision. So if I'm focusing, I can still see what's happening in the periphery. So look at your screen and then do this. You can still read the words, but you're noticing that motion is happening sort of around you. They think that we had two vision systems that evolved together as we evolved from single cell organisms up. Central vision is the middle 2 to 5 degrees of our vision range, and it is for picking out the most specific information of depth, and it provides the most clear information. So things that we are required to judge distance and analyze, we using central vision. So when we're looking at the eye movement goggles, we're looking, and that's where the iris is, we're looking at how central vision is moving. Peripheral vision is still very important, but it's central vision that's utilized when we're focusing in on things. When we're doing a specific motor skill, we're going to be focusing in on, like for example, like a reaching and grasping task, we're going to be focusing in on the target to get the information of like distance and like estimations of size and what we would have to do to complete the task. When we're walking or in locomotive motor skills, it's central visions that analyzing the path. Peripheral vision is for picking out movement. And so it's the outside limits of our vision, and it's important at giving us feedback in terms of any motions happening. So that would include motions of the environment or motion of our limbs. So when we're walking down a hallway and you can see something, you know, like you see, like you know, you're walking and you see something come out in front of you, or you're moving and then something drops and you can like sort of catch it. It's our peripheral vision that's picking out motion. So it's not, you don't know, like you don't know what it was that dropped or come out of nowhere, or an animal or something, but you realize that your body, your peripheral vision is very good at picking out motion. Megan has, I do visual field testing at my work, and it's crazy how much peripheral vision someone can lose before they realize they're actually losing it. Yeah, yeah, because it's not very clear like central vision. It's like very diffuse. It can pick out so much. Yeah. So based on Casey's point, for a reaching and grasping task, so let's say I'm reaching and grasping, my central vision is going to be focusing in on the cup, but my peripheral vision is going to be monitoring the movement of my elbow. Yes, I would say that peripheral vision is like the unconscious vision. Walking on a pathway, our central vision is going to be looking at the pathway, but then our peripheral vision is going to be picking out, you know, if people are moving or if things are happening in the environment. Peripheral vision is movement. Central vision is the specific clear vision. I guess you can't really say unconscious versus conscious, because when something moves, it becomes conscious to us. But I totally get what you mean. Does that make sense, everyone? Alliance, is it weird that I'm always aware of my periphery? It's just because you're not really focusing on anything. You have ADD. You can be aware of things when I go driving. I don't even look ahead most of the time. You probably do. You're probably scanning over, right? And so guys, Ahmed's mom drives him. That's why he's not looking. So remember, everyone always gets scared. That's funny. Can you take a video of that happening, and then we'll rate your motor skills? So two more slides. So remember we were talking about perception action coupling. It's vision that's going to perceive, and then it's going to be tied into or like adding to the motor skill of when we complete an action, right? So central vision is going to be very important in perception action coupling when timing our movements with the environment. Peripheral vision is going to give us an awareness of change or motion, but perception action coupling is going to give us that specific information as when we need to time our movements with the environment. To work in a system, like we need, so remember what that video was saying with Ronaldo, we need about 200 milliseconds. We need about 100 to 160 milliseconds to be able to react to feedback. And what we realize as researchers is that, remember how when we were talking about the curb example? When you're walking over across the street and you're going to just step over a curb, are you walking and do you consciously tell yourself, okay, wait, I should now lift up my foot so I don't hit the curb? Or does it just sort of happen? So that just shows that instinctively our timing of our movements with the environment isn't conscious. It's sort of, it's not processed. It's something's happening automatically. And so this researcher, David Lee, he did research with braking. And so depending on when you're driving and how fast you're going, we instinctively understand when to start braking. We don't like consciously think to ourselves. We have an estimation of when we should start braking. And the reason why is because automatically we have this optical variable called tau. And so our eye, our central vision, is able to pick up or judge speed based on the relative change of an image as it gets closer to us. So if you're in, like, anyone plays video games, if you're playing a video game and you want to make the video game look or give the perception of something coming towards you, how do you do that? You make it slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger. And depending on how fast it gets bigger, it gives you the sort of perception of speed. Does that make sense? So when baseball players are going to time their swinging movements with the ball coming in, they're staring at the ball and they get a perception of when to time their batting because of, that perception of how fast the ball is going because of how big it is increasing in size on our retina. So what they realize is that it's central vision that does this. So it's not just noticing motion, it's noticing the relative change of size. That's central vision. So what they realized was for motor skills that are involving timing or perception action coupling in relation of timing our movements with the environment in a specific circumstance, our central vision has to focus on that target. So in the walking curb example, we're looking at we're walking on the path and our central vision is picking up the curb. It's our central vision that is going to give us that perception of timing of when we need to step over. If Ahmed is driving and he's looking out the window and there's a car coming up, he realizes there's a car because he sees sort of motion. He's not going to recognize when to start his braking. He's just going to hit the car in front of him. How many times have you been driving and looking around, and there's a car ahead of you kind of, and then when you look forward, you realize that, oh crap, I need to stop. Because it's central vision that gives you the sort of awareness of timing. Does that make sense? And so what they do is they realized in motor control research using those goggles that when it's in relation to timing movements with the environment, central vision is very, very important because it's what gives us that timing to complete the task. So how was that, everyone? Any questions before we get going? No questions? Okay, well, have a great weekend. Nope, lectures will always be virtual. Okay, awesome. Yes, it is a lot of info. Just sort of keep the outline of the lecture on the side so you can kind of organize it. And then as you go through it a bunch, you'll be able to sort of consolidate all the information. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Enjoy the labs. Stay safe.